The courtroom was dead silent, the kind of silence that screams. Grant sat there in his $5,000 Brioni suit, checking his Rolex, looking at his wife like she was a stain on his shoe. He couldn't wait to wipe off. He leaned over his voice, a cruel whisper that echoed in the heavy air. "Sign the papers, Grace. You leave with nothing. No alimony, no house. Just the clothes on your back. You're nobody without me." Grace looked down at her shaking hands, tears hitting the mahogany table. The judge was about to bang the gavel. It was over. Evil had won, or so Grant thought, because at that exact second, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open, they were thrown wide. And the man who walked in didn't just stop the trial. He stopped Grant's heart. This is the story of how a greedy husband lost everything in a single heartbeat. Grant Ezra was the kind of man who didn't just enter a room. He annexed it. As the CFO of Ezra Hale Tech, a company on the verge of a historic IPO on the NASDAQ, he moved through the world with the confidence of a man who had never been told no without firing the person who said it. He sat in the back of his chauffeured Mercedes Maybach S-Class, the city of New York blurring past him in streaks of grey and gold. He wasn't looking at the city, though. He was looking at his reflection in the darkened window, adjusting his silk tie. Tonight was the night. He wasn't nervous about the merger. He wasn't nervous about the board meeting. He was nervous about how long it would take to get Grace out of the penthouse so Tiffany could move in. "Driver," Grant barked, not bothering to look up from his iPhone 15 Pro Max. "Stop at the florist. Get 24 roses, red, and make sure they aren't the cheap ones from the bodega. I want the Ecuadorian long stems." He wasn't buying them for Grace. He was buying them to soften the blow, a tactical maneuver he'd read about in The Art of War, or perhaps some twisted relationship advice column on Reddit. Disarm the enemy before the strike. When he arrived at their penthouse at 432 Park Avenue, a sprawling, glass-walled fortress in the sky that cost more than most people earned in 10 lifetimes. Grace was waiting. She was sitting on the edge of the white leather sectional, looking small. Grace was always small, quiet, unassuming. She wore a simple beige cardigan from The Gap and jeans that had seen better days. She was the woman who had paid his rent when he was a broke intern. She was the woman who had edited his resume, ironed his shirts for his first interviews, and comforted him when he cried after being fired from his first startup. But to Grant, looking at her now, she wasn't his partner. She was an anchor, a relic of a past he wanted to bury. She didn't fit the image of a billionaire tech mogul. She didn't wear Versace. She didn't know how to pronounce the names on the wine list at Le Bernardin. She preferred staying in to watch Netflix over gala, hopping in the Hamptons. "Grant?" she asked, standing up. Her eyes were red. She knew. Wives always know. "You're late?" "Business, Grace. Always business." Grant lied smoothly, tossing the roses onto the kitchen island with a careless thud. He didn't hand them to her. "We need to talk." Grace wrapped her arms around herself. "Is this about the messages I found on your iPad?" Grant's face hardened. He didn't flinch. He walked over to the minibar and poured himself 3 fingers of Macallan 25. "Stop snooping, Grace. It's unbecoming. But since you brought it up, yes, it's about that, and it's about us." He took a sip, the liquid gold burning his throat. "I want a divorce." He said it as casually as ordering a coffee. Grace let out a choked sound, a half sob. "Grant, we've been married for 12 years. I worked 2 jobs so you could get your MBA. I signed the loan for this company when no bank would touch you. And you've been compensated, Grant shot back, his voice rising. You live in a $15 million apartment. You drive a Range Rover. You haven't worked a day in 5 years. You've been paid for your investment, Grace. But the contract is up. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. He slapped it onto the marble countertop. My lawyers drew this up this morning. It's generous, considering. You get the condo in Jersey, the rental unit, not the vacation home. You get to keep your jewelry, and I'll give you a lump sum of $50,000 to help you get settled. Grace stared at the papers, her face pale. 50,000, Grant, our assets are worth hundreds of millions. The company is mine, Grant roared, slamming his hand down. The crystal glass shook. My genius, my late nights, my stress. You were just the cheerleader on the sidelines. And don't think about fighting this, Grace. I have the best lawyers in the city. Kravitz and Moore. They eat people like you for breakfast. If you contest this, I will drain every joint account we have before you can even file a motion. I will bury you in legal fees until you're begging for spare change on the subway. He walked closer to her, looming over her petite frame. You signed a prenup, remember? I signed a napkin in a diner when we were 22, Grace cried. That can't be valid. It is when you have my lawyers, Grant sneered. Sign the papers, Grace. Pack a bag. I want you out by tomorrow morning. I have guests coming for the weekend. We all knew who the guest was. Tiffany. A 24-year-old influencer Grant had met in Miami who thought NASDAQ was a type of nail polish. Grace looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time in years. She didn't see the man she loved. She saw a monster in a suit. You're making a mistake, Grant, she whispered. The only mistake I made was marrying a waitress. He spat. Get out! The next 3 months were a blur of humiliation for Grace. Grant wasn't bluffing. Within an hour of her leaving the penthouse, her credit cards were declined. She went to check into a Motel 6 in Queens because her Platinum Amex, the one he swore was for emergencies, was flagged as stolen. He had reported it the second she walked out the door. She tried to access their joint checking account to pay for a lawyer. Access denied. 0 balance. He had moved every cent into offshore shells in the Caymans. It was illegal, of course, but untangling it would take a forensic accountant and 50 grand she didn't have. She ended up sleeping on the couch of her old college friend, Jessica. Jessica was a sweet girl, a librarian who lived in a cramped one-bedroom walk-up in Brooklyn that smelled faintly of cat litter and boiled cabbage. He can't do this, Grace, Jessica said one night, handing Grace a cup of instant noodles. It was a far cry from the private chef dinners Grace was used to, but it tasted better because it was given with love. It's barbaric. He can, Grace said, staring blankly at the TV. He owns the narrative. I saw the papers today. The New York Post ran a story. Tech mogul's wife caught cheating Grant Ezra files for divorce after heartbreak. He planted a story, Jess. He's destroying my reputation so no one will believe me. Grace had tried to get a lawyer. She met with 3 high-powered firms. As soon as she said Grant Ezra, they closed their notebooks, conflicted out. Grant had paid a consultation fee to every top divorce lawyer in Manhattan just to ensure they couldn't represent her. It was a classic dirty billionaire tactic. She was left with a court-appointed attorney, a tired, overworked man named Mr. Henderson, who had coffee stains on his tie and seemingly hadn't slept since the Carter administration. Look, Mrs. Ezra, Henderson had said, shuffling through piles of paper, The prenup, the napkin thing, it's weak, but he has an army of sharks. They are burying us in discovery requests. They want receipts for every grocery trip you made in 2018. They are trying to bleed you out. My advice, take the settlement, get the 50 grand, restart your life. I can't let him win, Grace said, her voice trembling. It's not about the money. It's about the fact that he thinks I'm nobody. He thinks I have no one. That night, lying on Jessica's lumpy couch, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, Grace made a decision. She reached into her duffel bag, the only luggage she had taken, and pulled out an old burner Nokia phone. It wasn't her regular iPhone. It was a phone she had kept hidden in the back of her sock drawer for 12 years. She turned it on. The battery was low, but it had a signal. There was only one number saved in the contacts. It was labeled simply "Do Not Call." She stared at the glowing screen. Her hand hovered over the green button. Grant didn't know who she really was. When they met, she was waitressing at a diner near NYU. She told him she was an orphan from the Midwest, that she had no family, no connections. She wanted to be loved for her, not for her last name. She wanted to escape the suffocating pressure of her lineage, the expectations, the security teams, the board meetings she was forced to attend as a child. She had walked away from a life that Grant could only dream of, just to be with a man who made her laugh. And now that man had thrown her away like garbage. She pressed the green button. It rang once. Twice. "This line is for emergencies only." A deep baritone voice answered. No hello, no pleasantries. The voice was cold, efficient, and terrifyingly familiar. "Alexander," Grace whispered. A tear rolled down her cheek. "It's me. It's Grace." There was a silence on the other end. A silence so heavy it felt like the air pressure in the room dropped. "Grace." The voice softened just a fraction. It was the voice of a man who commanded armies, or in this case a global conglomerate. "It has been 12 years. Mother thinks you are in Europe." "I'm in Brooklyn," she choked out. I made a mistake, Alex. I married a man. A bad man." "I know," Alexander said. The sound of a keyboard clacking furiously came through the line. "Grant Ezra Hale Tech. I've been tracking him since the day you registered your marriage license. I respected your wish for privacy, Grace. I let you play normal life, but I have a file on him thicker than the Bible." Grace sat up, wiping her eyes. "He's trying to destroy me, Alex. He threw me out. He froze everything. He thinks I'm a broke waitress with no family." On the other end of the line, she heard a sound she hadn't heard since childhood. A low, dark chuckle. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound a lion makes before it eats a gazelle. "He thinks you are a waitress?" Alexander asked. "Oh, Grace, that is the biggest mistake of his life." "I have a court hearing in 3 days," Grace said. "Final settlement. He's going to force me to sign." "Let him try," Alexander said. "Don't sign anything. Go to the court. Let him say his piece. Let him dig his grave." "But I have no lawyer, just a public defender." "You don't need a lawyer, little sister," Alexander said. "You have the family." "Will you come?" she asked, her voice small. "I'm already on the jet," Alexander replied. "See you in court." The line went dead. Grace closed the phone. For the first time in 3 months, she didn't feel afraid. She felt something else. She felt the cold, hard steel of her heritage coming back to her spine. She wasn't just Grace the waitress. She was a Rockefeller, or close enough to it. And Grant Ezra was about to learn that there are some sharks in the ocean that are too big to eat. The morning of the hearing, the sky over Manhattan was a slate gray, weeping a cold, miserable drizzle that seemed designed to dampen spirits. For Grace, shivering in her thin coat outside the New York County Family Court, the weather felt appropriate. She wasn't alone, but she might as well have been. Mr. Henderson, her court-appointed attorney, was currently trying to get mustard out of his tie with a wet napkin while balancing a briefcase that looked like it had survived a war zone. "Okay, Mrs. Ezra," Henderson muttered, giving up on the stain. "Here's the game plan. We go in, we plead financial hardship, and we pray Judge Pendergast had a good breakfast. If we're lucky, he might grant you an extra month in the rental unit before you have to vacate. But regarding the asset split, don't get your hopes up. Kravitz is a pit bull." "I'm not worried about the rental unit," Grace said softly, her eyes scanning the street. She wasn't looking for a taxi. She was looking for a sign. But the street was empty of black SUVs. Had Alexander been serious? Or was it just another empty promise from a family she had abandoned? Just then a commotion erupted near the main entrance. Flashbulbs popped like lightning strikes. A sleek black Maybach pulled up to the curb, flanked by two private security SUVs. Grant Ezra emerged. He looked like $1 billion. He was wearing a custom Navy Tom Ford suit, the kind that cost more than Henderson's car. He paused for the cameras flashing, that practiced shark-like small that had graced the cover of Forbes just last month. Beside him was his legal team, 3 men in identical grey suits, led by Simon Kravitz. Kravitz was legendary. He was the lawyer you hired when you were guilty and rich. He had divorced rock stars, senators, and tech moguls, leaving their spouses with nothing but emotional trauma. "Mr. Ezra. Mr. Ezra." "Is it true she cheated?" a paparazzo yelled. Grant stopped, feigning a look of deep sadness. "I just want privacy during this difficult time," he said loud enough for the microphones to catch. "I wish Grace the best, despite everything." He walked up the steps, radiating power. As he passed Grace, who was standing near a pillar, trying to stay dry, he didn't even turn his head. But he whispered just loud enough for her to hear. "You look pathetic." Grace felt the sting of tears, but she bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted iron. "Hold on," she told herself. "Just hold on." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was oppressive. It smelled of floor wax and old wood. Grant's team took up the entire right side of the room. They had laptops, paralegals, and stacks of binders. They looked like they were launching a military invasion. Grace and Henderson sat on the left, at a scarred wooden table. Henderson had one yellow legal pad and a leaking pen. "All rise!" the bailiff bellowed. Judge Pendergast walked in. He was an older man, with a face like a crumpled paper bag, and a reputation for hating long trials. He looked at the clock before he even sat down. "Docket number 4920, Pendergast grunted. "Ezra versus Ezra, finalizing the divorce decree and asset division. Mr. Kravitz, you have the floor. Keep it brief. I have a tea time at 3. Kravitz stood up, buttoning his jacket. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at the gallery, performing for an audience of none. "Your Honor," Kravitz began, his voice smooth as oil. "This case is simple. We have a valid prenuptial agreement. We have a marriage of 12 years where my client, Mr. Ezra, was the sole earner, the sole creator of value, and the sole bearer of financial risk. The respondent, Mrs. Ezra, has contributed 0 financial assets to the marriage. In fact, her exorbitant spending habits have been a drain on my client's resources. He gestured to a stack of papers. We have credit card statements here showing thousands of dollars spent on frivolous items while my client was working 80-hour weeks building Ezra Hale tech. Grace gasped. That's a lie. Those were expenses for his client dinners. I hosted them. Quiet, Mrs. Ezra, the judge snapped. Your lawyer will speak for you. Henderson stood up, looking terrified. Your Honor, my client alleges that the pre-enip was signed under duress and without legal representation. She was 22. Grant interrupted from his seat, looking bored. She was perfectly capable of reading. She was just happy to land a meal ticket. Mr. Ezra, restrain yourself, the judge warned, though he didn't sound angry. He turned to Henderson. Counselor, unless you have proof of duress, the document stands. Mr. Kravitz, proceed with the settlement offer. Kravitz smirked. Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Ezra is a generous man, despite the infidelity, which we are prepared to prove with witness testimony. Grace's head snapped up. Infidelity. I never touched another man. We have an affidavit from a pool boy in the Hamptons, Kravitz lied effortlessly. But to save the court time, Mr. Ezra is willing to overlook this. He offers a one-time payment of $50,000. In exchange, Mrs. Ezra waives all rights to the company, the real estate, and future alimony. She must also sign a non-disclosure agreement, preventing her from discussing Mr. Ezra or his business. The judge nodded, looking bored. Seems standard. Mr. Henderson, do you accept? Henderson looked at Grace. Mrs. Ezra, it's the best you're going to get. If they bring the pool boy in, even if it's a lie, the legal battle will take years. You don't have the money. Grace looked at Grant. He was checking his watch again. He looked so sure of himself, so untouchable. She looked at the heavy wooden doors at the back of the room. They remained closed. He's not coming, she thought, a cold dread filling her stomach. Alexander isn't coming. I'm alone. Mrs. Ezra, the judge asked, his voice impatient. We need an answer. Accept the $50,000 and the NDA, or we proceed to trial right now, where Mr. Kravitz will likely strip you of even that small kindness. Grant leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. His expression was one of pure pity. Take the money, Grace. Go back to whatever diner I found you in. Don't embarrass yourself. Grace stood up. Her legs were shaking, but she forced her spine straight. She remembered who her grandmother was. She remembered the lessons on posture she had hated as a child. Grace started, her voice cracking. She cleared her throat. I will not sign. The room went silent. Grant let out a loud, mocking laugh. Oh, for God's sake. I will not sign, Grace repeated louder this time, because $50,000 doesn't cover the interest on the loan I gave you. What loan? Grant scoffed. You never had a dime? The emotional loan, Grace said, improvising, stalling for time. The years of my life. Your Honor, this is a waste of the court's time. Kravitz sighed. She's delusional. I move to enforce the prenup immediately. Granted, Judge Pendergast said, reaching for his gavel. I'm ending this circus. Judgment for the plaintiff. The prenuptial agreement is upheld. Mrs. Ezra, you are awarded. Boom! The sound wasn't a gavel. It was the double oak doors at the back of the courtroom hitting the walls with the force of a battering ram. Every head in the room swiveled. The bailiff reached for his belt. Startled. Standing in the doorway was a man who seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. He was tall, well over 6'3", with shoulders that filled out a charcoal grey suit that was cut with a precision that made Grant's Tom Ford look like it came from a discount rack. His hair was silver at the temples, his face a mask of cold aristocratic fury. He wasn't alone. Behind him flowed a river of people. 6 lawyers in identical black suits, carrying leather briefcases that looked heavy with doom. 2 personal security guards with earpieces who scanned the room with predatory eyes. And, inexplicably, a court stenographer of their own. Grant frowned, squinting. "Who the hell is this?" "We're in a closed session." The stranger didn't look at Grant. He didn't look at the judge. He walked straight down the center aisle, his dress shoes clicking against the floor with a rhythmic military cadence. The air in the room seemed to vibrate with his presence. This wasn't just money walking in. This was power. The kind of power that buys the bank, not just the account. "You can't be in here." Kravitz stood up, though he looked suddenly smaller. "Judge, order this man out." Judge Pendergast, however, had gone pale. He was staring at the man's face, recognition dawning in his eyes like a horror movie realization. The stranger stopped at the wooden gate that separated the gallery from the court floor. One of his security guards opened it for him. He walked past Henderson, who was currently gaping like a fish, and stood next to Grace. He placed one hand on her shoulder, a gentle, protective weight. "My apologies for the tardiness, Your Honor," the man said. His voice was deep resonant and carried a British boarding school clip that screamed old money. Traffic on the bridge was dreadful. We had to take the helicopter to the heliport and drive from there. Who are you?" Grant demanded, standing up. "Get away from my wife." The man turned slowly to face Grant. It was like a glacier turning to face a rowboat. "I am not here for your wife, Mr. Ezra," the man said coolly. "I am here for my client." "She has a lawyer," Grant pointed at the trembling Henderson. "Mr. Henderson is relieved of his duties as of this moment," the man said, snapping his fingers. One of the 6 lawyers behind him stepped forward and dropped a thick file onto the defense table. It landed with a heavy thud that echoed in the silence. "I am assuming representation for Mrs. Grace." The man paused, looking at Grace with a hint of a smile. "Mrs. Grace Rothschild Vanderbilt." The silence that followed lasted 5 seconds, then pandemonium. "What?" Grant laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Her name is Grace Miller. She's a nobody from Ohio." Grace Miller was the alias she used to live a normal life. The man continued, unbuttoning his suit jacket to reveal a silk vest. To escape the burden of her legacy, a legacy she foolishly thought she could trade for love. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I am Alexander Rothschild Vanderbilt, CEO of the Sovereign Global Trust, and more importantly, Grace's older brother." Judge Pendergast swallowed hard. Mr. Vanderbilt, I wasn't aware." "Clearly," Alexander cut him off. "If you were, you wouldn't be entertaining this farce of a pre-nuptial agreement, a document signed without proper counsel regarding an estate that at the time was already worth more than the GDP of a small country." Grant's face went from red to chalk white. He looked at Grace. She wasn't looking at the floor anymore. She was looking at him. And for the first time, he saw the resemblance. The sharp jawline. The steel in the eyes. It had been there the whole time. "This is a joke," Grant stammered. "Grace, tell them this is a joke." Grace looked at her brother, then at Grant. She didn't smile. "Alexander isn't known for his sense of humor." "Grant," she said quietly. Alexander turned his full attention to Grant. Mr. Ezra, you offered my sister $50,000. It was a settlement, Grant squeaked. 50,000, Alexander repeated, as if tasting a rotten lemon. That is roughly what I spent on fuel to fly here today. He signaled to his team of lawyers. They began unpacking laptops and projectors. You wanted to discuss finances, Mr. Ezra? Alexander said, his voice dropping to a predatory growl. Let's discuss finances. But let's not talk about your pitiful tech startup. Let's talk about the fact that Ezra Hale Tech was built on a seed loan Grace gave you 12 years ago. A loan drawn from her trust fund. A loan that, according to the fine print you never bothered to read because you were too busy looking at yourself in the mirror, entitles the trust to 60% equity in any venture founded with said capital. Grant froze. No, that was a gift. She said it was savings from waitressing. She lied to protect your ego, Alexander said. But the bank transfer records don't lie, and neither do the auditors I've had inside your company's servers for the last 24 hours. Alexander leaned in close to Grant, invading his personal space. You wanted her to leave with nothing, Grant Fine. But you forgot one thing. When you marry a queen, you don't get to banish her. You just wake up the king. Alexander turned to the judge. Your Honor, we are countersuing for fraud, embezzlement, and breach of contract, and we are freezing all assets of Ezra Hale Tech pending a federal audit. Oh, and Mr. Kravitz. He looked at Grant's high-priced lawyer. I wouldn't get too comfortable. My team just filed a complaint with the Bar Association regarding your pool boy affidavit. Perjury is a nasty business. The courtroom doors opened again. This time it wasn't family. It was the press. They had been tipped off, and behind them, 2 officers from the SEC. Grant Ezra slumped into his chair, the master of the universe, suddenly realizing he was just a tenant, and the eviction notice had just arrived. The courtroom, once a place of sleepy bureaucracy, had transformed into a high-tech command center. Alexander's legal team moved with the synchronized efficiency of a pit crew. Within minutes, a portable projector was humming, casting a bright, high-definition image onto the courtroom's white wall, overshadowing the peeling paint and the faded state seal. Grant sat frozen, his hand gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard his knuckles were white. "This is inadmissible," he shouted, though his voice lacked its usual boom. "You can't just barge in here and hijack a legal proceeding." "Actually," Judge Pendergast said, leaning forward, his glasses reflecting the light of the projector. The judge seemed to have woken up from his stupor, energized by the sudden proximity to immense power. If there is evidence of fraud regarding the marital assets, Mr. Ezra, the court is obligated to hear it. Proceed, Mr. Vanderbilt. Alexander nodded to his lead counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Graves. She tapped a key on her laptop. The screen displayed a scanned image of a check. It was dated 12 years ago. "This," Alexander began walking toward the screen, "is the check Grace gave you to start Ezra Hale Tech. $20,000. You claimed in your deposition that this was her life savings from waitressing tips." "It was," Grant insisted. "She saved it in a shoebox." "Grace," Alexander said, gently turning to his sister. "Did you save this in a shoebox?" Grace stood up. Her voice was steady now. "No. I told Grant that so he wouldn't feel insecure about me having money. I wired it from an account my grandfather set up for me." "Lies," Grant spat. "The numbers don't lie, Grant," Alexander said coldly. He pointed to the routing number on the bottom of the check image. "Victoria, zoom in on the routing sequence. The image expanded. "That is not a routing number for Chase or Bank of America," Alexander explained to the room. "That is a SWIFT code for the Vanderbilt Family Trust Sovereign Division. It's a private internal banking system. And see this memo line, Investment, Series A." Grant blinked. "What?" "No," it said, "for your dream." "The physical check you saw said that," Alexander corrected. "The digital transfer record, the legal instrument that actually moved the money, was coded by the trust automatically. Every dime that leaves our family accounts is tagged. By accepting that money, Grant, you didn't just borrow cash from a girlfriend. You accepted venture capital from a sovereign trust. And per the standard terms of that trust, terms that are automatically attached to any outgoing capital, we retain a controlling interest until the principal is repaid with interest." "Which it never was." Grant looked at Kravitz, his lawyer. "Simon, say something. Tell them this is bullshit." Kravitz was sweating profusely. He was frantically scrolling through legal statutes on his iPad. I need to review the trust laws regarding implied contracts, Mr. Ezra. If the money came from a trust—" "It gets worse," Alexander interrupted. Victoria clicked the next slide. It was a complex web of bank accounts. "You tried to hide your assets, Grant," Alexander said, his voice dropping an octave. "You moved $12 million last week to a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Blue Horizon Holdings. You thought it was untraceable." "It is," Grant blurted out, then clamped his hand over his mouth. "Admission of guilt," Victoria noted, calmly typing into the court record. "It was untraceable," Alexander corrected. "To the FBI, maybe. To the IRS, perhaps, for a few years. But you made a fatal error in choosing your offshore bank. You deposited the funds into the Bank of St. George in Georgetown." Grant's eyes darted around. "So what? It's a private bank?" Alexander smiled. It was a terrifying, shark-like smile. "Grant, who do you think owns the Bank of St. George?" The silence stretched out taut as a piano wire. "I bought it," Alexander whispered. 3 days ago, while you were busy kicking my sister out of her home, I was purchasing the controlling stake in the financial institution where you were hiding your stolen money. I own your bank, Grant. I own your accounts. And this morning at 8:00 a.m., I froze them." Grant scrambled for his phone. He opened his banking app. His face went grey. Access denied. Account locked. You can't do that," Grant wheezed. "That's illegal." "I'm the chairman of the board." Alexander shrugged. "I ordered an internal audit due to suspicious activity. It's perfectly legal. Your assets are frozen, Mr. Ezra, all of them. You can't even buy a hot dog right now." Judge Pendergast looked at Grant with open disdain. "Mr. Ezra, is this true? Did you attempt to conceal $12 million from this court while pleading that your wife should receive nothing?" I, Grant stammered. He looked at Kravitz. Kravitz stood up, closing his briefcase. "Your Honor, I would like to request a recess to confer with my client." "There will be no recess," Alexander boomed, his voice echoing off the walls, "because we are not done. We have addressed the money. Now let's address the character assassination." Alexander snapped his fingers. Victoria pulled up a new file. It was a video file. "The pool boy," Alexander announced. "The witness you paid to say he slept with Grace." Grant's head snapped up. "I didn't pay him." On the screen, a shaky video started playing. It looked like it was filmed in a car. A young man with a tan, the pool boy, was holding a stack of cash. Yeah, the guy in the suit, Ezra, the boy on the video said, counting the hundreds. He gave me $5,000. Said all I had to do was sign a paper saying I banged his wife. Easy money, right? I never even met the lady. But hey, rent is due. The courtroom erupted. The press in the back were typing furiously on their phones. Perjury! Judge Pendergast roared, slamming his gavel. Mr. Kravitz, did you suborn perjury in my courtroom? Kravitz backed away from Grant, as if he were radioactive. I had no idea, Your Honor. My client provided the witness. I am withdrawing as counsel immediately. You can't quit, Grant screamed, grabbing Kravitz's arm. I paid you a retainer, and I'm keeping it for the emotional distress of dealing with you. Kravitz shook him off and practically ran toward the exit. Grant stood alone at the defense table. His suit suddenly looked too big. His empire was crumbling brick by brick in real time. Grace watched him. She expected to feel joy. She expected to feel triumph, but mostly she just felt a profound sense of closure. The monster wasn't a monster. He was just a small, greedy man who had picked a fight with a god. Grant, Grace said, her voice cutting through the noise. He turned to her, his eyes wild. It's over, she said. It's not over, Grant yelled, losing his composure entirely. I'm still the CEO. I still have the IPO next week. Ezra Hale is going public. I'll make billions. I'll hire better lawyers. I'll bury you all. Alexander checked his watch. Ah, the IPO. I almost forgot. He turned to the back of the room. Gentlemen. The two men in the cheap suits who had entered with the press stepped forward. They weren't wearing Brioni. They were wearing federal badges. Grant Ezra, the taller agent said. I'm Special Agent Miller with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and this is Agent Ross from the FBI's White Collar Crimes Division. Grant's knees buckled. He actually grabbed the table to stay upright. The air in the courtroom became heavy, suffocating. The presence of the FBI has a way of making even the most arrogant men feel very small. What is this? Grant whispered, his voice trembling. I haven't done anything wrong with the company. The numbers are solid. Agent Miller stepped through the wooden gate, ignoring the bailiff. Mr. Ezra, we received a tip-off regarding your S1 filing for the upcoming IPO, specifically regarding the disclosure of pending litigation and asset ownership. There was no pending litigation, Grant insisted. I divorced her. You failed to disclose that 60% of the initial seed capital was subject to a lien by a sovereign trust. The agent said, glancing at Alexander. By claiming full ownership of the equity in your filings to the SEC, you committed securities fraud. You misled investors. That's a clerical error, Grant cried. And the FBI agent added, we also have evidence that you used company funds to pay for personal legal fees, specifically the retainer for Kravitz and Moore, and categorized it as R&D in your ledger. That is embezzlement, Mr. Ezra. Grant looked at Alexander. You tipped them off. I merely forwarded the audit results my team conducted this morning, Alexander said smoothly. As the majority shareholder, which I legally am based on the original loan terms, I have a fiduciary duty to report criminal activity within the company. You killed the IPO, Grant whispered, the reality crashing down on him. You killed the company. I saved the company, Alexander corrected. I'm removing the cancer. That's you. Agent Miller pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metal clicked ominously in the quiet room. Grant Ezra, you are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit perjury. Please place your hands behind your back. No. No, wait. Grant backed away, knocking over his chair. I can explain. I can make a deal, Grace. Grace, tell them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. He looked at his wife, the woman he had thrown out like trash just days ago. He looked for the kindness he had exploited for a decade. He looked for the weakness. Grace stood up. She walked around the table until she was face to face with him. She was inches from the handcuffs dangling from the agent's hand. Grace, please. Grant begged, tears streaming down his face now. I'm your husband. We had good times, didn't we? Remember the trip to Cabo? Remember when I bought you that car? I remember, Grace said softly. I remember you telling me I was nobody. I remember you telling me to leave with nothing. I was angry, I didn't mean it. You meant every word, Grant, Grace said. You fell in love with a version of me that you could control, and when you got bored you tried to erase me. But you forgot one thing. What? Grant sniffled. I'm not just a waitress, she said, her voice turning to steel. And I never wanted your money. I just wanted you to be a good man. You couldn't even do that. She turned to the agent. He's all yours. As the agent spun Grant around and clicked the cuffs onto his wrists, a cell phone began to ring. It was lying on the defense table where Grant had dropped it. The caller ID flashed on the screen, bright and mocking Tiffany. Grant twisted his head. Tiffany. Someone answer that. She'll help me. Her dad is a senator. Alexander reached down and picked up the phone. He pressed the speaker button. Grant? Tiffany's voice came through shrill and angry. Babe, why is my credit card declining? I'm at Saks and it's embarrassing. And why are there people on Twitter saying you're being arrested? Grant. Hello. Alexander held the phone up. Miss Tiffany. This is Alexander Vanderbilt. I'm afraid Grant can't come to the phone right now. He's currently being taken into federal custody. Who is this? Tiffany screeched. Where is Grant? Grant is indigent, Alexander said coolly. His assets are frozen. His company is under federal investigation, and the penthouse you were planning to move into. It belongs to the trust now. I'd suggest you find another sponsor. This one is tapped out. There was a pause, then a distinct click. Tiffany hung up. Grant let out a sob. It was a pathetic, broken sound. Take him away, Judge Pendergast ordered, waving his hand as if shooing a fly. Two marshals grabbed Grant by the arms and began dragging him towards the side exit. He wasn't walking like a CEO anymore. He was stumbling his expensive shoes, scuffing the floor. His head hung low. As they reached the door, Grant looked back one last time. He looked at Alexander, looking regal and untouched. He looked at Grace, who was being hugged by her brother. I made you, Grant screamed, a final desperate delusion. You're nothing without me. The door slammed shut, cutting off his voice. The silence that followed was heavy but clean. It was the silence after a storm passes. Alexander exhaled and adjusted his cufflinks. Well, that was rather dramatic. I do detest scenes. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, I assume the divorce decree can now be finalized on our terms. Judge Pendergast was practically writing the order before Alexander finished the sentence. Absolutely, Mr. Vanderbilt. Judgment for the respondent. Full ownership of all marital assets transferred to Mrs. Ezra. Alimony denied to Mr. Ezra. Restraining order granted. The judge banged the gavel. Whack! Court adjourned. Grace felt her knees give way. She didn't fall, though. Alexander caught her. I've got you, he whispered. You're safe, Grace. You're home." Grace buried her face in her brother's expensive suit, and finally, after 3 months of holding it together, she wept. Not for Grant, but for the time she had wasted trying to be small for a man who never deserved her bigness. "Come," Alexander said, guiding her toward the doors. "The helicopter is waiting. Mother is expecting us for tea, and she is dying to hear how you destroyed a tech CEO in under 20 minutes. "I didn't do it." Grace wiped her eyes. "You did." Alexander smiled, opening the doors to the blinding flash of paparazzi cameras waiting outside. "No, Grace," he said. "I just brought the hammer. You were the one who finally decided to swing it." 6 months later, the world looked very different through the reinforced glass of a visitation booth at the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville. Grant Ezra sat on the metal stool, looking 10 years older. The custom Tom Ford suits were gone, replaced by a drab khaki jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight. His hair, once perfectly coiffed with $50 gel, was buzzing, short, and graying at the temples. He wasn't the master of the universe anymore. He was inmate 9482B. He looked at the clock on the wall. He had used his one phone call credit for the week to arrange this meeting. He had begged. He had pleaded with Alexander's lawyers. And miraculously, she had agreed to come. The heavy steel door on the other side of the glass opened. Grace walked in. Grant felt a lump form in his throat. She didn't look like the Grace he had married. She didn't look like the Grace he had divorced either. She looked formidable. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that looked simple but screamed couture. Her hair was cut into a sharp, chic bob. She wore no jewelry except for a small gold pin on her lapel, the crest of the Vanderbilt family. She sat down, picking up the black phone receiver on her side of the glass. Grant picked up his. His hand was shaking. "Grace," he rasped. His voice was rusty. "You came." "I did," Grace said calmly. Her voice wasn't cold, but it was distant, like she was speaking to him from another planet. "You said it was urgent regarding the company." "The company?" Grant let out a dry, bitter laugh. "I hear you renamed it." "I did." Grace nodded. "Ezra Hale is dead. The brand was Toolkit. It's called Sovereign Tech now. We're focusing on sustainable energy software. The IPO launched last week. It opened at $40 a share. We're up 30%. Grant flinched. That was his dream. His IPO. And she had done it without him. "I built that engine," Grant whispered. "The code. It was mine." "The code was average, Grant," Grace corrected him gently. "The team built it. The engineers you ignored, the developers you underpaid. I gave them all equity. Productivity is through the roof. It turns out when you treat people like human beings rather than tools, they build better things." Grant looked down at the scratched metal counter. "I lost everything, Grace. The penthouse, the cars. Tiffany left me the day the news broke. She sold the engagement ring I gave her. It was a fake, by the way. I never told you that. I bought a cubic zirconia to save money for the merger." Grace didn't blink. "I know. The appraisers found out when they liquidated your assets to pay the fines. I have nothing," Grant said, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm in here for 5 years, minimum. When I get out, I'll be 45 and bankrupt. Grace, I'm begging you. You have billions, the trust, your family. It's nothing to you. Can't you help me? Just a little. Put some money in my commissary account. Help me with an appeal." He looked at her with those puppy dog eyes that had worked on her a decade ago. He was trying to find the waitress, the girl who would give him her last tip dollar to buy him a sandwich. Grace looked at him, and for a moment she remembered. She remembered the nights they ordered pizza on the floor of their first apartment. She remembered the laughter, but then she remembered the way he looked at her in the courtroom. "You leave with nothing." "I can't help you, Grant," Grace said. "Why not?" he pleaded. "Out of spite." "No," Grace said. "Because I already did. I paid your legal fees for the criminal trial." Grant froze. "What?" "The public defender they assigned you was overwhelmed," Grace explained. "I hired a decent defense attorney, anonymously, to ensure you got a fair trial. If I hadn't, you would have gotten 10 years, not 5. Grant stared at her, stunned. You paid for my lawyer." "I did. Because unlike you, Grant, I don't believe in kicking people when they're down. I believe in justice. And justice is served." She stood up. "Wait." Grant panicked, pressing his hand against the glass. "Don't go, Grace, I still love you. We can fix this. When I get out." Grace looked at his hand on the glass, then up to his desperate eyes. "Goodbye, Grant," she said softly. "I hope you find who you are in here. Because the man outside, he wasn't worth knowing." She hung up the phone. As she turned to leave, Grant started screaming into the receiver, slamming his fist against the glass, but the sound was muffled, distant. A guard stepped forward, grabbing Grant's shoulder to restrain him. Grace didn't look back. She walked out of the prison and into the bright, crisp autumn air. A black SUV was waiting. The rear door opened, and Alexander was sitting there, reading the Financial Times. "How was it?" Alexander asked, folding the paper as she slid in. "Sad," Grace said, buckling her seatbelt. "He's just small. Men like him usually are once you strip away the borrowed suits," Alexander said. "Are you ready?" "Mother is waiting at the estate. The board of directors is flying in for dinner. They want to vote on the new chairwoman." Grace looked out the window as the car pulled away, leaving the grey prison walls behind. She saw her reflection in the glass. She didn't see a victim. She didn't see a waitress. She saw a woman who had walked through fire and come out made of gold. "I'm ready." Grace smiled. "Good." Alexander grinned, tapping the driver's partition. "To the airport, James. The chairwoman has a plane to catch." As the car sped toward the horizon, Grace pulled out her phone. She opened her banking app not to check her balance, which was astronomical, but to make a transfer. She sent $50,000 to the Legal Aid Society of New York with a memo, "For those who leave with nothing." She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had left the marriage with nothing, it was true. But she had walked out of that courtroom with everything that actually mattered. And that is the story of Grant, Ezra, and Grace. Grant thought that power came from money, from status, and from the ability to crush the people around him. He thought he could discard his wife like an old receipt because he believed she was weak. But he forgot the most important rule of life. You never really know who you are dealing with. He mistook Grace's kindness for weakness and her silence for submission. He didn't realize that the person holding the ladder for him was the only reason he was standing so high. In the end, Grant got exactly what he asked for. He wanted Grace to leave with nothing. Instead, she left with her dignity, her family, and his entire company. And Grant. He was left with the only thing he truly earned, a lonely cell, and the memory of the woman he was too blind to value. It's a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. Be careful who you step on while you're climbing to the top. because they might just be the ones holding the safety net. And sometimes when you cut them loose, you're the one who falls. Wow, what a roller coaster. I have to ask you guys, do you think Grace was too nice paying for his lawyer at the end? Or was that the ultimate power move? I honestly think seeing him rot in prison while she runs his company is the best revenge of all. Let me know in the comments. If you were, Grace, would you have visited him in prison, or would you have just ghosted him forever? I read every single comment. If you enjoyed this story of massive karma, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story about arrogant billionaires getting exactly what they deserve. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth always comes out in the end. See you in the next video.